Chapter 12. Becoming a Refugee. I came to Liverpool Street Station. It was very dark, but the moon was shining. It was a long trip, hours. I didn't enjoy it because I was hungry and thirsty and afraid. There was supposed to be someone there with a placard to meet them, but Ruth didn't see anyone. She was small. The strangeness was so overwhelming that she couldn't take it in. Everyone around her spoke English, and she didn't understand a word. It was dark. She noticed that there were black people in the crowds. She'd never seen a black person before. She left the station not knowing what to do. At last, finding a policeman, she showed him the address she had been given of a refuge somewhere in the East End of London. I went there. I don't know how I went there. That's all in a daze, I went there into a cellar. I came in alone. I should have stuck to those girls from the boat, but they were real Jews. They seemed to know each other, and I must have been a bit shy. At the reception centre, they took her in. They were expecting her. There were mattresses on the floor and a long table with plates piled with thick slices of white bread spread with margarine and huge pots of tea. I tucked in like a wolf. Whilst those others were disgusted at their reception, I was glad. I had tea with lots of sugar in it and bread, thick, soft white bread, which I thought was fantastic, crisp on the outside. I remember going into it. I must have been very hungry. That didn't cost me anything, you see, so I tucked in like mad. Breakfast was the same, bread and tea. And then they were sorted out. A young man who spoke some German took her to Baker Street Station, put her on an Uxbridge train on the Metropolitan line, and told her to get out at Croxley Green, and once again she was on her own. To a young woman used to city life in Berlin, Croxley Green seemed a very small place, a quiet village with tiny houses, and a road going down to the village green and the pub. It was lunchtime when she arrived. I went into the pub and got myself tidied up. I put on lipstick, 4711. 4711 or Königstrasse was the original eau de Cologne, so that I'd smell nice and feel good. I combed my hair. A few houses further on was the place where I had to go, the house of Mr. and Mrs. Ritchie. 8 weeks after her arrival, England and Germany were at war. Ruth was 25. At 25, you're considered to be an adult. You think of yourself as an adult. Perhaps today's 25-year-olds are more sophisticated than I was, but when I look back at myself at that age, from where I am now, all I remember is self-consciousness, vulnerability, and passion. I was passionate about politics. This was before my later disillusionment set in. At that age, I fervently believed that individuals could really make a difference. Ruth, for all that she had retained a belief in the goodness of people, had been forced to realize the danger that many people in Germany posed for her. She must have known how helpless people can feel in the face of world events. As a 25-year-old, she did all she could to help herself to survive, by escaping from Germany on her own and starting a safer but very different life as a refugee in England. At the Ritchies' house in Croxley Green, Hertfordshire, Ruth's first job as live-in help in England in the summer of 1939, she came face to face with the English class system. Although her jobs in Germany had been fairly menial, she had nearly always been included, sharing the meals and social life of the families she worked for. Now, although she was treated kindly enough by the Ritchies, and indeed was still sending Christmas cards to Mrs. Ritchie many years later, she was banished to the kitchen at mealtimes, never to be included or treated as part of the family. She found this experience of class segregation utterly humiliating, and not at all what she had expected on her arrival in Britain. Her idea of England, from her German perspective, had always been that the English were very refined. In fact, she found that they tended to be much more snobbish and class-conscious than Germans, and generally far less cultured. It has to be said, though, that she had been fortunate to have been living amongst particularly cultured people in Germany. At first, she had great difficulty in understanding the English language. Something she found strange one afternoon when she went out on her first walk through the village was the notice on so many shop doors that she mistakenly read as being the English for closet, the German word for WC. How many lavatories did the English need? Later, she learned the real meaning of the word closed. The first time that Mrs. Ritchie asked her to put some jars of preserves up there, meaning the top shelf in the kitchen, she misunderstood, and although puzzled at having to take them up to the bedrooms, she took the jars upstairs, much to her employer's astonishment. Mr. Ritchie commuted to his job in London every day. He worked for the civil service. Mrs. Ritchie spent her days socialising and doing good works in the community. She trusted Ruth to keep the house clean and get the washing and ironing done, but while Mrs. Ritchie was away from the house, Ruth spent her time writing letters to contacts she had in London, trying to trace Hans Werner. Sometimes she dressed up in her smart Taubenblau, which is a Thor blue, kind of greyish blue suit, the one she had made in Berlin for her journey to England, twisted up her dark hair and applied a touch of lipstick. Then she'd take the 40-minute train journey to London on the Metropolitan line, looking for people in the Jewish community who might help with her search. She would hurry back to Croxley Green just before Mrs. Ritchie was expected home and rush round in a panic, clearing up. I asked her why she didn't do the cleaning first before going out. She looked surprised, paused, then laughed and shrugged. I don't know. I just didn't. Ach, I was young and in love. All I needed was to find Hans Werner. 8 weeks after her arrival in England, the war with Germany began, and suddenly she was an alien in a country fighting against her homeland. In Germany, her beloved brother had had to join up. Hans was a reluctant soldier, especially as he was totally against the fascists. In fact, if they had been aware of his communist sympathies or his half-Jewish blood, he would have been in grave danger. Throughout the war, Ruth never knew if he was alive or dead. Living in such a traditional English village as Croxley, she must have felt conspicuously foreign. "Did you find Hans Werner?" I asked her when we were talking about those days. "Not at first, but after a while I did, yes. He came to tea. I think Mrs. Ritchie was quite impressed with him. She allowed us to have our tea in her parlour." "What was it like for you, meeting him again?" They had, after all, not parted on very friendly terms when she had left Alexa and Hans Werner in Berlin in 1937. "I was at first very happy. We went for a long walk after tea. He was nice to me, but he told me not to wait for him. He said he would never marry. He was still absolutely upset about his father, of course, and was very worried about Alexa's safety, and the war, and the whole business in Germany with the Nazis. He said I must get on with my life. He couldn't commit to a relationship. Everything seemed in such a fragile state." "How did that make you feel?" Yeah, I was very upset. Very upset. I wanted him, you see. I just wanted him." She didn't stay at all long in Croxley Green. The following year, she was living in the East End of London, working as a nanny to the 6 children of a German pastor. Here she felt she fitted in better with the more cosmopolitan community of Whitechapel Road. "We had raids every night. We had to go to the cellar. It was a mission house. Mr. Poms was a priest, and that is where they had their services. The whole house belonged to the church, really. It was a huge cellar. There was a landmine in the back of the garden, and when it went off, I saw the ceiling move down and go up again. I couldn't believe it. There were mattresses down there. They stayed down there. There were other people coming in too. They had 6 children, the Poms, and then there were other clergymen, and upstairs there were 3 missionaries, and they had a little flat up there. And then sometimes from Pinner there was one young clergyman. He came. He liked to put his place next to my mattress. He wanted to be naughty with me, but I wasn't. He was German as well. His teeth were a little apart, and I didn't like that. And he was married and had children. All through the Blitz in the autumn of 1940, Ruth lived in the East End, where night after night she was kept awake by the wailing of air raid sirens, the sharp battery of gunfire, and the deep grinding throb of German aircraft. Night after night, as bombs exploded, shaking the mission house and ripping nearby buildings to rubble, she tried to get to sleep in the cellars. But even fear of constant air raids and disappointment at Hans Werner's rejection couldn't stop her youthful determination to live and to have fun. I had a policeman boyfriend. I forget what his name was now. Brown, I think. He was so tall. He liked me. I think he might have been married, but he said it was his sister. He was from Forest Hill. When there was a raid, we had to run for shelter. He'd put me on his shoulders and walk very, very fast. He was not in uniform. You could go to any cellar during air raids, and there was the underground. I remember once we were on one of the bridges, I think it was Westminster Bridge, in the middle of an air raid. We went to a shelter, to one of those Anderson shelters under the earth. They were in Hyde Park. It could have been a different bridge. Anyway, I wasn't scared of the bombs. It's funny. When you're young, you're agitated. It's a very great excitement, you know, which can turn into fear. It amazes me that people like Ruth, such a quiet, peace-loving woman, managed to live and find the spirit and the bravery to carry on with their lives as if everything was normal. How would we, who have lived our lives without fear of imminent death from the skies, cope with such daily trauma? There were no therapists or counsellors in those days. Everyone had to get on with their lives and cope on their own. You'd think they'd want to talk about the experience, to us, the generations that followed, to share those awful memories and take away the pain. But it took a great deal of gentle encouragement to earn the privilege of those confidences I was allowed to hear. The bombing of London went on and on all through the autumn of 1940. More sights and smells of death and devastation greeted her every morning. Wandering through the rubble of broken bricks, tiles and dusty mortar, children collected prized pieces of shiny, jagged shrapnel and anything else they could scavenge from the destruction. Sides of apartment blocks were blown away, exposing wallpaper, pictures with their glass shattered, hanging at strange angles, and broken furniture, all the ruined remains of people's homes. Being outside in the street often involved stepping over snaking hosepipes and pieces of burned and twisted metal. She never spoke to me about the deaths, the thousands of people who didn't survive those air raids. Every morning, when we came outside, there were piles and piles of glass. It was the Jewish quarter, Whitechapel Road. There were lots of shops. Woolworths had once a big hit, and that was burning. Oh, that was burning. And then, a day or so after, people were going in, and they picked things up. But it was always a smell of burning and awful. I went in just to see, and it stank. I picked up a hanky. They had hankies for sale. I never would have got the smell out. The worst was the landmine. I wish she had told me more. I wish I could ask her All those questions that have occurred to me since we talked. Looking back, our conversations were extraordinarily lacking in detail. It was as if it was fine to talk about these events in general terms, but not to dig too deeply, just in case the turbulent emotions of those times were stirred up once again.